Hello, I'm Maria from the Richardson's Homeschool Life. Today's Tuesday, so I'm back with you with another vlog. I'm just going to adjust you a moment. There we go, that feels better. I feel like seeing more of the fridge than you can of me. As you saw at the introduction you've seen a variety of photographs. They're all sort of late 1800s, turn of the century photos. And some of the people in them you might know, others you might not know. But what I want you to do is have a look at these photographs. So I'd left them for a little while, but have a look, see who you know, who you don't know. And what I'm going to do is, when I finish talking, I'll tell you about them anyway, but I'll pop them up again at the end of the video and you can have another look then when you know what it's all about. So yeah, last week I said I was going to talk a bit about a mystery. This week, a bit of a whodunit mystery. It's not a murder or anything like that, and it's not as long as the Rose Harsent story. In fact, I didn't write it down this time. I think maybe I should have done, because I'll probably miss telling you things, but I thought I'll just say it as it comes, because I've been studying it so much lately and trying to make a bit of headway with it, but I've not been able to really. It really is a mystery, even though it's not that long ago. Well, I'd say not that long ago, probably about 130 years ago now. But it doesn't seem like long ago in the relativity of time. But yeah, what I was talking about last week when we went to Colcabby, and I was saying I was interested in the servant quarters, and we're talking about servants and talking about like the different class of people for the day. And really it leads a bit into this week, because I'm going to talk a bit about my family tree, so genealogy. Also it's educational, because I'm going to talk about servants, that kind of thing, and it will lead into this little mystery really. You might even guess what kind of mystery it is. So yeah, I was going to talk about, we're going back, like I say, to the turn of the century, late 1800s, very early 1900s, more the late 1800s. Times were a lot different then. I mean, we're talking now in the UK. Times were a lot different then, and there wasn't all the welfare system in place like there is today. I mean, you did get parish relief and things like that, but if you were poor, you really were destitute, there was not a lot to fall back on. And then the other end of the scale, you'd got the very wealthy people, the rich people who owned lots of land. And these are the people that in most villages, there was big manor houses, and they would have owned lots and lots of land round and about. And most villages were owned by a local landowner, somebody big like a lord, somebody like that. I mean, not far from me we've got Sudbury Hall, which still stands, and that was owned by Lord Vernon, the Vernon family, and they had control of all that area. Now I'm talking about the area I'm going to is in Staffordshire, and it was the Needwood area. Now the Needwood area, going back to the time period I want to discuss, the big houses, there was a couple of big houses there, and they were owned by the Bass family, as in Bass's beer, the brewers. I think Coors have bought them out now, but the big brewers, Bass, they owned them, and the lord of the manor there was known as Lord Burton, because Bass's was in Burton-on-Trent in Staffordshire. So we're talking about, I'm going to be talking about the Bass family. Well, not a lot about the family, but this is in relation to my family tree. So, say at the turn of the century, sort of from the mid-1800s upwards, when my family settled in Staffordshire, well, one side of my family settled in Staffordshire, they were quite well to do. One side of my family was quite well to do. They were tailors, they had their own business, and there was a whole family of them. They were all tailors. They all sort of owned houses and businesses, and some of them had a bit of land and they were quite well off. But one, I think it was my 3 times great granddad, Yeah, 3 times great granddad. He was married and got children, and then his wife died, probably in childbirth, because it seems like there was a child born close to when she died. But he then went off with the servant girl, and that was not a done thing. That was just not done. So he got disinherited from the family land, business, everything. He was just cut off from a lot of money. So then it was sort of down to him and his family to survive without all the I wouldn't say great deal of wealth, but they were well off. They weren't poor by any means, but they had to survive on their own without any family money or anything like that. And up until this point, they did have people working for them, like a servant girl. Some people in the family, oh, she was a neighbour and a helper, but others in the family say she actually was a servant girl and she worked for them. But she was a lot younger anyway than my 3 times great granddad. She was a young girl and he was a middle-aged man by this time. But anyway, he married her and they went on to have children, but there was no more servant girls. There was no more family cash. They had to go on their own. Well, then my 2 times great granddad, it gets complicated. He was, he stayed around the area because some of them moved away. One of his brothers went off and to the Metropolitan Police in London and became quite high up there. But he stayed around there, my 2nd great granddad, in the Needwood area. And he got a job working for the Bass family. Now there's various Bass members that owned various houses in the area, in the Needwood area. And they're all from the Brewing family, but they, you know, like brothers, they got married and had children, well, sons, and so there was a few of them, and they were controlling different areas and different businesses. Some were still working at the breweries, owning them, and others, one of them, William Bass, now I'm not quite sure, my 2nd times great granddad had a lot to do with him, but I don't actually know if he worked for him, because Billy Bass, he owned Berkeley Lodge, which was a big house, and he had a stud farm there, and he owned that. But my 2 times great granddad didn't seem to work for him. He seemed to work for his cousin Michael Bass, who was running the brewery. He seemed to work for them. So how he knew Billy Bass, I don't really know, but Billy Bass has sent him Christmas cards at Christmas and got Berkeley Lodge pictures of them on. So I've got the originals of them actually, and that's quite, I did look on eBay so that you could get pictures and photos of it, but I saw one photo, but there was definitely no Christmas cards and nothing signed by William Bass. So I've got the actual ones of them. That's quite nice in the photo album. But yeah, beside the point, I go off the trail. I should have wrote it down, then I wouldn't go off the trail so easily. But yeah, so my 2nd great granddad, he stayed in the area, in the Needwood area, and he seemed to get in with the Bass family, and he worked for them. He worked for Michael Bass, and he was an usher. So an usher was quite, not the highest rank, and definitely not the lowest rank, but it was sort of, it was like an intermediary, if I say that word right. So like, he would oversee what the lower was doing and report to the higher, and also he would be responsible for visitors and things like that, looking after visitors. I mean, nowadays we think of an usher as in somebody showing someone to a seat in the cinema or that kind of thing, but in a way it was a bit like that. He did take care of visitors and things like that, but he also took care of the things that were going underneath him, and he reported to the person above him, and it was like all wheels in a cog. So he was an usher, and he worked for Michael Bass, and he was stationed at Rangemore. I'm not sure if it's Rangemore Lodge, Rangemore House, something like that. They're all different names, but they're all in the Needwood area. So he was stationed there, And at that time, he wasn't living on the property. He went to and fro to work. So he worked for them on the Rangemore estate. But somehow, he had a lot to do with William Bass, who was in the Berkeley Lodge. But anyway, as time went on and he'd got children, my great-grandma's sister, her oldest sister, Mary, she went to work as a servant girl in the Rangemore estate. Now, in those days, I'll just say a bit about working for them, because I was thinking about from an educational point of view. Nowadays, we think, we look back and think servants, how lowly, but at least it was a job. But it must have been a miserable existence, because they left their families and went to work in these places. And although it was good because they got a bed and a roof over their head and food, but we tend to look at it thinking it was a bit of a lowly job. But actually, it wasn't. It wasn't at all. I mean, maybe if you worked like in the village, say like Rose Arsent now, I mean, even that wasn't a bad job. And she worked for a couple and she was on her own doing everything, but she got a lodging, she got fed and got a time off. But maybe in some places, if you worked for a family that wasn't so well off and they perhaps couldn't afford to pay you very well, and they kept you on a meagre existence food-wise, and maybe you didn't get a bedroom of your own, maybe you had to sleep in somewhere else in the house, that might not have been so brilliant. But a good position to have would be to get a servant's job or sort of an agricultural job in a big housing estate. If you got a family, a rich family, and you could secure yourself a position there, you could have a position for life. And not just in the position you started in, but you could work from the very bottom of the scale of servants and work your way over time right up to the top. And as you're doing that, you're learning different trades and different things relating to whatever you're doing all of the time. And it was a really good position to have. If you put it into the perspective of today, it would be like wanting your child to go to the best university, and especially where girls were concerned, because it gave girls a way of learning how to keep house for when they were married, because they were expected to go into this sort of job, into service, until they got married. They were then expected to find husbands, and that they would make the best wives because they had learnt the job. And so really, parents wanted positions like that for their children because they were very good positions to have. Most big houses looked after their servants quite well. I mean, you weren't on a par with them or anything like that, but the vast majority of big homes, and especially the ones I know around here and their employers, the lords, they were very good with their staff, very good. I mean, some almost treated them like family. Obviously, they knew the difference and whatnot, but they by no means mistreated them. They took care of them, and they were really good with them. So it was an excellent position to have. It would be a position you would want your child to have. Just like now, you might say, I want my child to go to such and such university. In those days, the late 1800s, you'd be saying, Lord Burton, Lord of the Manor, all these as I want my child to get a job there. Go and work there. You'll have some money, bring money in, and it's steady work. You're learning as you go. You can work your way up. They were good jobs to have, and they did keep you there as well. If they liked you and got on with you, they would keep you. And you say like you were a man, not a woman going off to get married, but a man. You could have your position there until the day you retired or died, whichever came first. You would keep your position, as did my second times great granddad. I had to think then which one he was. But yeah, perhaps it's easy if I called him by name, but but yeah, my second great granddad Joseph, he had a position with the Bass family right through all his life. He worked for them in different positions. Now, he was an usher, for quite many years. He was an usher. When my great-grandma was born, he was an usher for them. So he had a very good position. And like I said, when the children grew older and it was time for them to get a job, then because their girls did go to school and their sons, they did all go to school, all of them were educated, because they owned the local schools as well. That's another thing with the lords of the manor. They didn't just own their houses and the fields, they would own the local schools and put money into them. They would also, a lot of them, they had a lot to do with the church. And I'm not sure if it's the church, I'm not sure if it's Tate or church, but one of the churches in the Needwood Forest was built by Michael Bass, or his money funded to have a lot done to the church. It was down to him, there's a church there. So yeah, they had a lot to do with things like that. So I lost train of thought now where I was. That's not very professional, is it? So yeah, anyway, when it was time for the girls to go to school, my great-grandma's oldest sister, Mary, they got her a position. Obviously, they'd have mentioned it to whoever they mentioned it to. My great-great-granddad Joseph did, and he'd have said, I've got a daughter coming up a working age, she's left school, and, you know, is there a position she could have? So they found her a position. She had a position as a servant girl at the lower end of the scale, because they wouldn't expect girls to stay long anyway, because they'd just get enough experience on what they need to do, and then they'd be off again getting married. So, you know, they didn't expect girls to stay as long, but obviously some did, because not every woman got married. But anyway, Mary. Now, the story is about Mary, actually. She's my great-great-aunt. Yes, great-great-aunt. She's my great-grandma's sister, eldest sister. Now, Mary, she started working there. I think she was about 17, 16 when she started working there, because the girls all went to school till they were about 15. They went to school for quite a while, which was a bit unusual then, because they only seemed to go to school till they were about 13, and after that they would go to work. That's if they were lucky enough to go to school. I mean, we all know about stories of children from a very young age working down mines, like Dean's side of the family, very different than my side of the family. They had to go to school young. They didn't have anything, and the children were working down the mines from a very young age, and most of them died. A lot of them died as well. So they were very different scale. But anyway, my great-grandma's sisters, siblings and everything, they all went to school till quite older age. A lot of them became school assistant teachers as well. But Mary didn't. Mary went into service, and she worked with Michael Bass for the Rangemore estate. Now, Michael Bass, Lord Burton, I'm not sure if he was a second Baron, something like that, but anyway, Michael Bass from Burton, Lord Burton as they knew him, he was very big friends with Edward the Seventh. He was very big friends with Edward the Seventh. I have to think about that, because I tend to want to say eighth, but Edward the Seventh, Queen Victoria's son, and Michael Bass were very big friends. Now, far bigger friends than what a lot of newspaper reports would say. Like when he became king, they did official visits in the newspapers and that, but there was a lot of unofficial visits, a lot. And before he became king, he spent a lot of his time with Michael Bass, and the Basses owned land and property up in Scotland as well, so he holidayed up there with them. But he was on the Rangemore estate an awful lot. He was there quite a lot. And yeah, so they were very big friends, and he used to go there with mistresses and things like that as well. And Michael Bass didn't seem to bother about that. I mean, in the Rangemore estate, I think it was the Rangemore house, they had a room dedicated to one of his mistresses with discreet entrances so they could go in and out. But he knew about what Edward was like. Maybe he was a bit that way himself, who knows. Not heard reports of that, but it was obviously very liberal-minded that he allowed for all of that. But then I suppose when you've got the future King of England, you can't say no, can you? But they were such good buddies anyway. So yeah, he went there, he went with mistresses, and obviously he took up ladies wherever he went. He was renowned for it, and around here, ask anybody, they'd know all about it. But anyway, Mary was working at Rangemore. Now, Mary became pregnant. This is the mystery, and you can guess what I'm going to say, can't you? Mary became pregnant. She was 17 years old, very young and fresh. And when it became known she was pregnant, she told everybody straight away that the child belonged to Edward VII. It was Edward's child. Now, I don't know, there's no proof of that, we can't prove it, but she said it was Edward's child. Did she say that so she wouldn't get in trouble? Because what's anybody going to say? Because it was quite obvious to all that Edward could do whatever he liked when he was there, you know. Or is it true? She was a young girl, she was fresh, she was 17 years old, young, unsport girl. You know, in Rangemore, he was in Rangemore regular. Did it, you know, was she one of the girls that he did take up with there? Now, normally in those times, if a servant girl got pregnant, like we were talking about Rose Harsant, that's what they call them round here, Harsant in Suffolk, like with Rose Harsant, she hid it simply because she'd lose her position. Girls did lose their position. Once they were pregnant, they were cast off the site, and that would be that. And it would be the end of her father's job as well. They would be cast off the site. Now, if it wasn't true, if Edward wasn't the father, I would imagine that straight away, Lord Burton, even though he's a very good employer, but for his credibility, and especially like his wife, they would have had words, and you know, they would have lost their jobs. She'd have lost the job straight away. A job would have been gone. But anyway, the job wasn't gone. It didn't go. And shortly after that, they ended up with an estate house they then lived in. They moved them from wherever they were living at the time, in the village they were living in. They got a permanent house, the whole family, in the lodgings. It was called the Needwood Lodge, and they was in the Needwood Lodge house, and that still stands today. We pass it many times. In fact, when I was alive, my mum always used to talk about it. When my mum was alive, we always used to talk about it. But yeah, they got housed in the Needwood Lodge house, and that's where the baby was born. My 2 times great granddad Joseph, he didn't lose his job, not at all. Like I say, Lord Burton gave them this house to live in, and they all lived in the Needwood Lodge house. The whole family moved into it. Mary had the baby there. That almost sounded religious then. But yeah, she had a son whom she named Frank, and he was there, and they all lived together. She, he was 3 months old, and she was already back working as a servant. They took her back straight in. All she did was have the baby, and she was straight back working again. Her job was still there. Nobody chucked her out. There's been no rumours of anything bad happening because of it. It always seemed good things happened because of it. You know, they were given this house, and my 2 times great granddad Joseph, he had a job for life. He was still working on the estates when he died. So nothing bad came of it. So what does that tell you, really? You know, Michael Bass knew Edward very well, or Bertie, I think they called him. But they were best of friends. They knew each other well. Did he know about Mary and that it was Edward's baby? Quite possibly so. highly likely. He'd have known Edward's comings and goings. He'd known he got an eye for the ladies. He'd have seen him take it with ladies on his estates, and when they were up in Scotland, he'd have seen it all. He knew. So I'm pretty sure that he probably knew about Mary, and instead of saying, we've got a pregnant girl here, she's out, we've got to cast her out for the family image. No, they got rewarded with a house on the estate for the entire family to move in. All of the family did well. The family all did very well. You know, they all had jobs and good positions, and they all seemed to prosper well. In fact, they had a lot of houses around the Needwood estate. They owned a lot of houses, as the Lords do. Like I said, they owned the old village and they had the houses. But the Basses decided to sell them. Now, I don't know if it's Michael Bass or his daughter Nellie Bass when she took over when her dad died, but they decided to sell all the houses. I think it was probably the daughter who decided to get rid of all the houses. And my great-grandparents, they got offered 2 of the houses, and whereas everybody had mortgages to do them, they were allowed to pay directly to the Bass family, just give them the money directly. They didn't have to go and get a mortgage or nothing like that. They could just pay it directly. So they decided in the end to take one house because they were quite big houses for the day. They were country houses. They got lots of ground, far more than I've got. They were 3 up, 2 down, big walk-in pantry. They got a stream running through the garden. They got outhouses, wash houses. They were really good for the day. Really good for the day. So they decided in the end to take one of the houses because they didn't really need the 2. Although it's been regretted by a few people ever since that they should have had the 2, but they decided on buying the 1, and they just paid Basses, you know, the cash in hand. They didn't have to go through any company, get any mortgage. Others who bought them on the estate got mortgages, but they didn't have to. And that's, you know, going back, I think, round about 1912-ish, something like that. So I don't know if that tells you something. I don't know, but they were, as long as the Basses were around, they were treated very well. The whole family were never without work. They were, you know, they had houses, they had everything. They did well. Now, as for Frank died in the 1970s. And they also had a house on the estate, and I believe that was a bit bigger than the one that my great-grandmother had. And he lived with one of their other sisters because one of the sisters was born a bit disabled. She'd got a withered hand, so she'd never really worked as such, and she was always taken care of. She'd just always taken care of. The Basses took care of her, and she in turn lived with Frank when the parents died, and they had one of the bigger houses on the estate. I mean, they're sold off again now, and you wouldn't recognise them now because obviously new tenants have sort of redone them all bigger and more modern. But yeah, it was lovely. It got woodland to it and everything, that one had, and it backed onto the Needwood large house, the big house itself. So they sort of only moved around the corner. But yeah, they got that, and sadly Frank never got married. And he never had children, which is a real shame, because if he had, maybe there would be some way of knowing with DNA. Maybe. I don't know. But then again, with the royal family, let me go DNA them. I doubt it. The only way we could know is if we could dig up his body and his bones and get DNA from them and some from the royalty. But that's not likely to happen. And they say there's lots of children of Edward the 7th. You want to say Edward the 7th is around, lots of children knocking around, although he never owned up to any illegitimate children. But apparently Camilla Parker Bowles, Prince Charles's wife, I don't know if it's a grandmother, maybe, is supposedly one of the illegitimate daughters of Edward the 7th. So Frank my great-great-uncle Frank could be related to them. They could have given him a better name than Frank. Should have said Francis or something like that. It's not quite fitting for the possible king's son, Frank. But yeah, that's it. See, we don't know. So I'm going to put these photos back up at the end so you can look through them again. Now, I'm not 100% sure which is Frank. I'm not sure because all I've got is a big old Victorian album with lots of pictures in. I'm told one is, but nobody knows which one. There is pictures of Frank in there, but nobody knows which one. So I put some up there that are around about the same time period as, you know, when he was born, because he was born in 1889. So I've sort of put like younger lads on for the time period that would be that time period for that age. So I'll let you look again and see what you think. Also, I've got a young picture of Edward VII on there, and I'm not sure if there's one or two pictures of his sons or one of his sons. So you can look through and see what you think. I think I know which one Frank is. I think I know which one, and I think I found a picture of his mum Mary, because it seems that they were grouped in families in this album. But my eldest auntie, she's 93, but she doesn't really know because she was born 1928. So she doesn't really know which it is. So, and my grandmother's obviously dead, so I can't ask her. So I don't know. I've been going through it, doing dating with the photographs and everything, because I've got a feeling this album is older than my great-grandmother. They always said it was their granny's album, which is my great-grandmother, but I think it may possibly have been her mother's, or some of the photos were from her mother's, because it's really old, and you can see by just dating the pictures. So I'll pop them back on again so you can have another look now at the end. And that's my mystery. I don't think I can think of anything else to say about it other than, you know, I don't know. I always used to say, I mean, we've known the story all our lives. My mum has always said about the story, and her sisters, and her mum had always said, her mum said her Uncle Frank was the son of King Edward VII. Nobody's ever disputed it. I don't know. I always used to think, oh, she made it up because she sort of, you know, went and got pregnant by somebody and knew if she said it was Edward VII, then she wouldn't get in trouble, or not as much trouble. She couldn't really get in trouble because what are they going to say to him? And they couldn't say to her, oh, no, you know, you should have said no, because who could say no to him, sort of thing. It'd been a bit like Henry VIII. So, yeah. Whether she said that story, but then again, if she had, and Lord Bass, they would have known that it wasn't true, and the family would have been in trouble. She'd have been in trouble. She'd have been cast out, you know. So I think the more I think about these things, it probably is true. It perhaps is true. But anyway, I'm going to leave these pictures at the end for you to look at again. And I'm going to see you next week. Next week now we're going to go back to homeschooling because we're getting closer to the end of the summer holidays. So next week we've been having a look at the curriculum, and so I'm going to go through it with you next week, what we're deciding we're going to do. Things may change as we go along. They always do, don't they? But this is how it's looking, what we're thinking of. So I'm going to show you that next week, what we're thinking of. Like I say, it's not a curriculum you buy or anything like that, other than a bit of Key Stage 3 stuff that we'll throw in. But everything else will be things she's interested in and how we're going to approach it. So show you that next week. We'll come back with that next week. So like I say now, just have another look at the photos. You can let me know in the comments below what you think, and if you think one of them is Frank, Edward VIII's son. Edward VIII, I've done it, haven't I? I knew I'd say it. Edward VII's son. Then say who you think, and actually, one or two of them actually are his son, legitimate sons. But I just want to compare them, you know, to see, because you have to bear in mind they've got different mothers and they would look totally different, the mothers. And if they took a lot more after the mother's side, then the features, you know, going to have a lot of different features. But there's always something, isn't there? So I'll let you have a look anyway. And I'll see you now next week. So in the meantime, take care, everybody. Bye.